Welcome to this launch of our report on DPRK strategic capabilities and security on the Korean Peninsula looking ahead. This is a joint endeavor by the Moscow-based Center for Energy and Security Studies, CENESS, and the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, based in London. Drawing on Korean, Russian, and Western sources, our in-depth report charts the purposes, pillars, and progress of North Korea's nuclear and missile programs over the years. It also examines possible international steps toward denuclearization and the goal of creating lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. I was delighted when CENESS founder and director Anton Khlopkov suggested to me a few years ago that we seek to produce a joint report. And he and I were just discussing the time when he suggested that. Dangerous tensions on the Korean Peninsula associated with North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons have been among the world's most complex and contentious security issues since the end of the Cold War. Both Anton and I and our respective institutes have been focused on these issues for many years. At various conferences and seminars, we realized that we often looked at the issues in different ways, and that American and Russian assessments about North Korea often differed or seemed to. We thought it would be useful to put our heads together and see if we could come up with a common set of findings. Given Russia's historical relationship with North Korea and the US alliance with South Korea, Moscow and Washington have special roles to play in promoting stability on the peninsula. As permanent members of the Security Council and depository states of the NPT, Russia and the United States also bear special responsibility for upholding peace and international security. Anton and I also thought that at a time of antagonistic superpower relations, if our two think tanks could reach shared conclusions about both the nature of the problem and potential solutions, it would help to facilitate discussions on how to promote pragmatic and effective Russian-US cooperation. Luckily, the MacArthur Foundation also thought so and agreed to fund the project, for which we are deeply appreciative. We started the project in 2017, a year that saw military escalation on the Korean Peninsula reach an unprecedented level in the post-Korean War. In preparing this report, we received valuable assistance from a Russian working group led by CENESS and a US working group led by IISS. The two working groups included former military officers, diplomats, nuclear specialists, and scholars specializing in Korean studies. The two groups worked independently, then compared and consolidated their drafts. The results are summarized in this joint report prepared by the project co-chairs. The report does not necessarily reflect the views of all experts involved in the study or of the organizations they represent. Sharing the labor of this launch in an equitable way, just as we have shared the work that went into the report, I will turn the floor over to Anton in a minute to discuss our findings regarding North Korea's nuclear program. Anton will then turn it back over to me to summarize our findings about the missile program. After that, Anton will review potential steps for tension reduction, confidence building, and denuclearization. He will also say a word about our respective working groups. We will then field questions. Anton, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your introductory remarks and for agreeing to my proposal to conduct a joint study, which, according to my notes, dated back to December 2nd, 2016. So it means that it took more than 4.5 years for us, for the idea to come to fruition. And I'm grateful to you and your colleagues at the International Institute for Strategic Studies for these years of cooperation. As I recall, The idea to conduct a joint study was born in December 2016 during a discussion between Russian and US scholars on the subject of Russian-US nuclear dialogue potential agenda after the US presidential elections. During that meeting, the participants from our two countries voiced very different assessments of the nature of the nuclear program, of the nuclear problem of the Korean Peninsula, and suggestions how to address that. So I'm glad that thanks to our joint efforts, we have managed to produce a joint report. Next slide, please. Now I move to the findings of the nuclear part of our report. And if we are serious about discussing the prospects of progress in the region, we should put the nuclear issue to a broader regional context. This is why we start our report with what was the DPRK motivations over the years to develop its nuclear capabilities. I would not go in the very details of the motivations. You can read them in the report. I would just name a few. Of course, first of all, this is the division of the Korean Peninsula and the DPRK perception of a US nuclear threat. Second, loss of full confidence in unreserved support from the Soviet Union and China in the event of the military crisis. Third, Republic of Korea pursuit of nuclear weapon development. And fourth, some experts argue that DPRK may see nuclear weapons as contributing to its stated goal of unifying the peninsula. It is not clear what was the major motive for DPRK, but I think it goes without saying that today the main priority for the DPRK is strengthening deterrence capability against the US by putting an end to perceived US invulnerability vis-a-vis Pyongyang. Next slide, please. If we speak about the key components of the DPRK nuclear infrastructure development, I think we should keep in mind three major elements: highly skilled and motivated scientists and engineers, and this is very prestigious in DPRK to be a part of scientific elite, to be a part of the team which is engaged in related activities. Second, extensive use of open source information. And we should recognize that DPRK scientists used a lot publicly available information to design and build their core nuclear facilities, including those facilities which at the end produce weapon-grade plutonium and highly enriched uranium. Third, concerted efforts to procure technologies, equipment, and materials using diversified channels. We can like it or not like it, but the fact of the life that North Koreans are very good in their procurement efforts. We just cannot ignore that fact. And as we specify in our report, there were cases when they received some components for their military nuclear and missile program from the same European source through two different routes. It's just another sign how efficient they are in their procurement activities. And it's another sign that sanction regime does not work to prevent North Korea from procurement of necessary materials and technologies. Next slide, please. As we concluded in our report, that the core technologies to produce weapon-grade materials and highly enriched uranium were built or came from using technologies of West European origin. This is the case for so-called 5 megawatt Magnox reactor, which was built based on UK technology. The same true with regard reprocessing facility, which was built after another European experience facility, which was originally built in Belgium by a consortium of 13 European countries. And when North Koreans face shortage of technology, of components, so they were trying to compensate their availability by highly skilled personnel or an extensive procurement network, which I already mentioned. And today the program is largely self-sufficient. There may be some minor components, equipment and materials which North Korea could be interested to get abroad, but in general, as we concluded, North Korea self-sufficient in its nuclear program nowadays. Next slide, please. I would not go through the milestones, nuclear milestones of the DPRK one by one. I just mentioned there were ups and downs, but when diplomacy failed in the past, like for example, after the breakup of the agreed framework, North Koreans speed up their nuclear activities. And for example, the agreed framework was broken in 2002, and in 2005, North Korea declared manufacture of their nuclear weapon. And as we know, the first nuclear test took place in 2006. In 2006. And altogether, from 2006 until 2017, 6 nuclear tests were conducted by North Korea. Next slide, please. I would focus on just couple of out of 6 nuclear tests. On the 5th one, which DPRK declared as it incorporated a weapon design standardized for ballistic missile use, because probably this test demonstrated progress in miniaturization in the DPRK. And also I would like to say a couple of words about the very last test, which took place in September 2017. DPRK claimed that it was a 2-stage thermonuclear bomb. Judging from the large yield and by a photo of Kim Jong-un with a mock-up of the 2-stage weapon, as well as other indicators, this claim may be well true. Although it is also possible to reach such a yield with an implosive fission type design without a thermonuclear reaction. And we do have a report, a historical example of that. Next slide, please. We do provide in the study estimated plutonium and HEU production. It's easy to make an estimate of plutonium production, because quite likely DPRK has just one source of plutonium, so-called 5 megawatt Magnox reactor. And the estimate in our report that as of today, North Korea probably produce and separated up to 55 kilograms of the plutonium. And if we take into consideration 10% production losses, and also that it is quite likely that up to 20 kilograms of plutonium were used in the previous nuclear test, today we believe North Korea could have from 18 to 30 kilograms of plutonium. Next slide. There is no reliable information when North Korea started industrial scale enrichment, how many enrichment facilities they have and what their capacities are. So the error of our estimate could be much higher in the case of HEU than when we speak about plutonium. But nevertheless, we estimated that as of today, North Koreans could produce, from 180 kilos up to 810 kilograms of plutonium. I'm sorry, highly enriched uranium. Next slide, please. What does it mean from the point of view of warheads stockpile? We believe that as of September 2020, the DPRK could produce up to 47 nuclear warheads. And all estimates regarding the potential size of DPRK stockpiles of weapon usable materials, as well as nuclear arsenal in our report are as of late September. We made several updates as we worked on this report, but at some point we decided that we cannot keep making those updates indefinitely. So we choose September 2020 as the cutoff date. Nevertheless, we have deliberately specified as many details as possible in our calculations, so they can be used to estimate the DPRK current nuclear capability today or 6 months down the line. These details can be used to challenge our estimates or to propose alternative one. As Mark already said, we will be very glad if our report serves as a catalyst for further discussion. And our estimate that if North Koreans are able to produce 6 kilos of plutonium and 100 kilograms of HEU per year, it means that probably they are able to make up to 5 nuclear warheads per year. Probably the final point here that we concluded in our report that DPRK may only have manufactured and single device of a thermonuclear yield, the one used in the 6th test. But many experts, both in Russia and in the US, including in our group, doubt that DPRK's current ability to build thermonuclear warheads suitable for mounting on its existing aircraft or missile delivery systems. And before I will return the floor to Mark for presenting the findings of the missile chapter of our report, I would also like to conclude with the following sentence. Harsh sanctions imposed on Pyongyang have probably delayed the progress, but have failed to prevent the DPRK from building plutonium and HEU facilities and acquiring a nuclear capability. I think this is an important conclusion when we think about possible future initiative. Thank you, Mark. Over to you. Mark, you're muted.
Picking up where Anton left off, the same thing applies to the missile program. Despite the very harsh sanctions over the years, North Korea has made impressive progress in the missile field. It's improving its ballistic missile technology at a very rapid pace. I'm going to try to share my screen now. Excuse me. Share, sorry. So in 2016, the DPRK launched launched 26 ballistic missiles or other systems using ballistic missile technology with a success rate of over 45%. In 2017, it conducted 20 launches of 8 or 9 types of ballistic missiles at a success rate of over 75%. North Korea's quest to acquire indigenous ballistic missile production capability began in the mid-1970s in response to the ROK's attempt to create a short-range missile. Like the nuclear program, the original motivation was to be able both to deter and to coerce. The main objectives today most likely include a credible capability to engage targets on the US mainland, development of a sea-based component, and increasing the ability to penetrate US missile defenses. The DPRK missile program was based on the same 3 pillars as the nuclear program: a highly skilled and motivated core of scientists and engineers, extensive use of open source information, and concerted efforts to procure technology, equipment, and materials using diversified channels. And here's one of the images from our report showing the origin of many of the parts that were found in the debris of a Unha-3 launch. But probably the most significant difference from the nuclear program was the DPRK's missile technology cooperation with other countries, primarily Iran and Pakistan. The core of the North Korean missile arsenal consists of mobile short-range missiles, so-called shorter-range missiles, and medium-range ballistic missiles. Energetic efforts are underway to complete development of intercontinental ballistic missiles as well, which could enter into service as operationally viable weapons during the next few years if subjected to additional flight tests. In 2017, the DPRK test launched a new single-stage medium-range ballistic missile, the Hwasong-12, known in the West as KN-17. This is a mobile-launched 3,700 kilometer range missile that can reach not only anywhere in South Korea and Japan, but also US bases in Guam. The missile used a new engine that appears to be derived from the Soviet-era RD-250 and produced by the DPRK indigenously using technical documentation acquired from Ukraine. The Hwasong-12 probably served as a technology demonstrator for the first stage of the Hwasong-14 ICBM that was flight tested twice in July 2017. By some calculations, if the steeply curved trajectory of those tests had been altered to maximize range, the missile could have reached targets lying 6,000 to 8,000 kilometers away. It means that the Hwasong-14 could be capable of striking Alaska and Hawaii and probably Seattle. These ranges assume that the warhead would weigh no more than 300 kilograms, with the re-entry overall mass being about 500 kilograms. Such miniaturization does not look very probable today. Carrying a bomb 100 kilograms heavier, the Hwasong-14's maximum reach is just under 6,000 kilometers. It's very sensitive to the warhead mass. Given the limited performance of the Hwasong-14, it was not surprising to see the DPRK introduce a larger, longer-range missile, the Hwasong-15, launching it on 29 November 2017 on a highly lofted trajectory. If a standard trajectory were used, the Hwasong-15 would be able to travel, according to some estimates, about 12,000 kilometers. Some experts concluded that it can deliver a 1,000 kilogram payload to any point on the US mainland. However, DPRK claims that it has a usable arsenal of ICBMs appear to be premature. The Hwasong-14 and Hwasong-15 launches conducted to date were tests involving prototype missiles traveling on inefficient flight paths that do not reflect the operational conditions expected when employed as a weapons system. Neither missile has been tested to its maximum range on a standard trajectory. Based on the North Korean missile industry's previous record, it will take a few years and a handful of additional flight tests under various operating conditions to eliminate teething problems and to enter the missiles into service with an expectation that they will generally perform as designed if fired during a crisis. The DPRK has also shown progress in solid fuel missiles. Shortly after North Korea began launching Hwasong-11 Toksa missiles in large numbers in 2013, a new, much larger solid fuel missile was tested, the medium-range submarine-launched Korean with an estimated range of about 1,200 kilometers. These missiles are probably intended to provide Pyongyang a future capability to deliver a retaliatory strike. On to October 2019, North Korea flight tested a two-stage solid fuel Hwasong-3 missile from an underwater launch system on a steep upward trajectory. If the Hwasong-3 had used a standard trajectory, according to some estimates, it would have overflown Japan and traveled up to 2,000 kilometers. To become operational, Hwasong-3 will require additional flight testing of the missile itself, as well as the construction of at least 3 submarines, which would need to undergo sea trials and crew training that may require an additional 5 to 10 years effort. Meanwhile, the Hwasong-1 design is being used to develop the land-based Hwasong-2 medium-range ballistic missile, which is launched from a canister carried on a tracked chassis for enhanced mobility. Deployment of these missiles, which may be imminent if not already in place, will be a major milestone, allowing the Korean People's Army Strategic Rocket Force to fire on a target 1,200 to 1,300 kilometers away within 10 to 15 minutes of receiving an order. In addition to the other advantages that make the new missile easier to operate and to conceal, its tracked chassis provides greater freedom of maneuver off-road. In other progress, North Korea in August 2016 introduced a new missile that appears to be a Hwasong-5 fitted with a maneuverable re-entry vehicle. Active guidance of the warhead during the terminal phase of the flight would be the most promising means of transforming a Scud-type missile into a precision-guided munition capable of destroying stationary targets. However, mastering the technologies and developing the subsystems needed to reliably maneuver the re-entry vehicle to a fixed target will require dozens of flight tests. In 2019, North Korea flight tested 3 new solid fuel short-range missiles, speculatively designated KN-23, KN-24, and KN-25 by the United States, reaching distances of 380 to 690 kilometers. The emergence of these missiles, in combination with the emergence of the Scud-derived missiles equipped with maneuverable reentry vehicles, provides compelling evidence, as if we needed any, that Pyongyang continues to seek enhanced capabilities. Critical questions about Pyongyang's missile arsenal remain unknown. Given the limited number of flight tests, the operational reliability of North Korea's newer missiles is unknown. Can North Korea protect a nuclear warhead from the rigors of atmospheric reentry at ICBM velocities? Can North Korea miniaturize a nuclear warhead sufficiently for its advanced missiles? No one outside North Korea knows the precise status of its nuclear bomb-making capabilities. I mean, for example, to reach the US mainland beyond Alaska, a lighter weight bomb may be required. Additional testing could help the DPRK fix any problems over time, enabling the full capacity of its many deployed ballistic missiles from short to intercontinental ranges. Conversely, testing restrictions as a result of negotiations or self-imposed could limit the development of the DPRK nuclear missile capability. So please keep this thought in mind. Thank you, and back over to Anton.
Thank you, Mark. A few words about the part 3 of the report, which is about potential steps for tension reduction, confidence building, and denuclearization. Next slide, please. As I and Mark already mentioned, the sanctions, pressure, threats on Pyongyang did not bring the expected result. Those efforts failed to prevent DPRK from acquiring a nuclear capability and missile systems, which quite likely are able to deliver the workable nuclear warheads to any place in Republic of Korea, to hit any target in Japan, and even to reach Guam, as Mark mentioned in his remarks. And this is to answer one of the questions which already was posed by the participants. So we, in our report, concluded that it is very likely that North Koreans are capable to deliver with short and medium range missiles the workable nuclear devices, nuclear warheads. Having said that, I would like to mention that the moratorium on nuclear tests and long-range missile launches that Pyongyang continued to observe as of today, as of July 2021, limits Pyongyang's ability to develop more advanced warheads and missiles. It's a different discussion what is behind this decision by Pyongyang to observe the moratorium, despite of the fact that there are no negotiations nowadays. But I would like to emphasize that it is really important if we are interested to limit Pyongyang further progress. And for me personally, this is a sign that diplomacy works. One of the conclusions of the report that DPRK, probably DPRK main objectives as part of the nuclear program include increasing its weapon usable nuclear material stockpiles as according to our estimates, DPRK likely nowadays has more nuclear capable delivery systems than nuclear material, weapon grade plutonium or highly enriched uranium to produce the warheads. And if the DPRK were to completely and permanently dismantle all its facilities at the Yongbyon Nuclear Research Center, what was discussed at the Hanoi summit, Pyongyang would have reduced its capability to make weapon usable fissile materials, according to our estimates, by up to 80%, and would also essentially freeze its thermonuclear program. I think this is also important conclusion to keep in mind when we think about possible future steps in the region if we are able to resume the dialogue. Next slide, please. What could be the potential steps if and when the dialogue in the region is resumed? We should be realistic that a rapid denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is not possible. It is not a realistic possibility. Having said that, I do believe that denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula must stay as a long-term goal. And developments during the diplomacy in 2018 and 2019 demonstrated that progress towards denuclearization is possible. And already we mentioned a few examples when those decisions which were made in Pyongyang as a result of the dialogue limit Pyongyang capability to improve its nuclear and missile technique and progress in their respective programs. And if we think about the future dialogue, the central principle of moving forward should be the parties must adopt and follow and step by step and reciprocal approach. Unfortunately, from my point of view, it was not the case during the most recent diplomacy, and lack of reciprocity prevented us from further progress as part of the diplomacy in the region in 2018 and 2019. And reciprocity is especially important for the early phase of the dialogue as an element of confidence building. And we should use those documents which were adopted in the past, including the Singapore joint statement, which contains an important concept. Mutual confidence building can promote a denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And this is very important because during the recent weeks and days, I hear more and more often about denuclearization of the DPRK. If this is the approach which will be promoted, I think there is no much opportunities. There are not many opportunities for us to reach and progress. We should follow the language of those documents which were adopted recently, and we should speak and work on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, as I mentioned, as a long-term goal. It is also important to establish the proportionate value of reciprocal steps and measures for the individual parties concerned. During the recent days, I think there was an imbalance what countries should go first, what countries should do more, and this is why we should focus on identifying, on establishing the proportionate value of reciprocal steps. Next slide, please. It is quite symbolic that the presentation of our report is taking place on July 14th, exactly the date when the JCPOA or so-called Iran nuclear deal was adopted in July 2015. And we do believe that Iran nuclear talks could be put to good use when we think about addressing challenges and risks on the Korean Peninsula. It is true that JCPOA specifies that it is not the precedent. This is correct. It is also correct that there is no sense, there is no reason to compare Iran nuclear program and DPRK nuclear program. They are quite different. And we can identify many differences between the situation, the crisis around Iran nuclear program and nuclear risks on the Korean Peninsula. But having said that, we do believe that we could apply or could try to apply some experience of JCPOA negotiations to the Korean Peninsula. For example, a multinational approach that combines bilateral and multilateral tracks, as was the case during the Iran negotiations. It looks the most promising and sustainable. I think that JCPOA during the recent years proved that multinational approach, multinational packaging of the deal is important. As we know well, despite of the fact that President Trump decided to withdraw from the JCPOA in May 2018, the deal, which is multinational, is still alive. I would not go into further details what is the future of the JCPOA, but for me personally, the JCPOA experience and multinational format of the deal is really important and could be used in the case of the Korean Peninsula. And in our communication, we've got an impression that distrustful of Washington, which withdrew from so many treaties and deals during the recent years, Pyongyang appears to be leaning towards multinational format. When I say that, of course, I do believe that if and when we have a multinational dialogue, Pyongyang and Washington should be the key players, while other countries should provide necessary support and positive contribution. And by the way, Panmunjom Declaration also emphasized the role of international support and cooperation for the cause of denuclearization of the peninsula. So we should try to build on the documents which were adopted during the recent years. And such principles as mutual respect, reciprocity, and recognition of state sovereignty and security interests of all parties could be also borrowed from Iran negotiations when we think about the Korean Peninsula and what could be done in the region. I refer to JCPOA experience, which is included in our report intentionally because of the symbolism, because of the date when we present our study. But it does not mean that there is no other experience which could be useful when we think about new initiatives in the region. And six-party talks is one of the format from which we should learn lessons. There were failures as part of this process for sure, as there were failures as part of many other efforts in the region. But for example, it could be useful to learn lessons from the working group that was established as part of the six-party talks to examine possible peace and security mechanism in the region. Last but not least, as Mark mentioned in his introductory remarks, I would like to say a few words about the working groups which contributed a lot to this study. Altogether, more than 30 people took part in preparing this report, including experts in Korean studies, former diplomats, military, non-proliferation experts. Mark already mentioned their background. But without their contribution, it would have been difficult, if not completely impossible, to conduct such a comprehensive piece of research. I'm therefore sincerely grateful to everyone who has made this report possible. I would particularly like to recognize the contribution made to this project by Mike Elliman, who was the co-chair of our project and who spent more than 10 years at the Institute of International and Strategic Studies. Mike lost his long fight with cancer on February 20th of this year. He was a world-class missile expert, very quick, fact-based, and depoliticized in his analysis. His contribution to missile technology section of this report is invaluable, and his death and his loss, not only for his family and his IISS colleagues and friends, but also for the entire international community of experts. We will miss him a lot. Having spoken of the great contribution by the Russian and US working groups, I would like to reiterate again what Mark Fitzpatrick has already said in his introductory remarks. The estimates and conclusions of the study do not necessarily represent a consensus among all experts who participated in the discussions of this project. Mark, over to you now to continue the presentation of our joint report.
Okay, great. We've had a lot of material presented. We'd like to address some questions. 10 of them have been posed in the chat function. I'm going to go through them. We're going to do this as quickly as possible because we only have about 10 minutes left. Anton, I need your help with two of the names. They appear in Cyrillic in the Q&A, and I can't read Cyrillic, unfortunately. So the very first one, Anton, can you read the name for me, please?
Andrei Gubin.
Thank you. So Andrei, thanks for sharing the expertise results. He wonders if there are any assessments of weaponization of nuclear devices. Do we know about real warheads ready to use? Anton, can you answer that briefly?
No one of us ever saw that, but based on the data which is available, the conclusion from our report that it is very likely, as I mentioned, that North Koreans are capable to miniaturize and deliver the warheads with short and medium range missiles.
Thanks. Tariq Rauf asks, would you concur that denuclearization policy has been a total failure from its inception? He says Bill Perry and James Clapper have suggested that DPRK nuclear weapons are here to stay, and we need to deal with this through engagement. What is your recommendation? Anton, if you'd like to answer, then I have my own answer. I may add a word.
Go ahead, Mark. I will follow you.
Yeah. So, Tariq, we posit the goal of denuclearization has to be the goal of any engagement policy. We also posit, though, that smaller goals need to be pursued in a step-by-step manner. We do not say that nuclear weapons are here to stay. No. And we do not say either that the denuclearization policy has been a failure, but reading through the lines, I wouldn't be surprised if people reached that conclusion. Ambassador Nobuyase Abe asks, how do we estimate the survivability of North Korean missiles in underground or on mobile or in submarines against conventional or nuclear prompt strikes or anti-submarine warfare? Ambassador Abe, we don't assess this, but I'll just respond briefly that it very much depends on accurate information about where these systems are, and if the information is accurate and timely enough, then I don't doubt that U.S. And other countries have capabilities that could take them out. But I can't speak to the accuracy of the information. Anytime you want to jump in, Anton, just go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, if I may to step in at this point. As we mentioned in the report, we do believe that North Koreans are interested to improve this availability of the system they have. This should be a natural interest in Pyongyang. This is first, and this is exactly the reason why they are so much interested to develop solid fuel technology. And back to the question from Tariq, I would not call it a total failure. And as I mentioned, even the diplomacy during 2018-2019 brought some tangible results. So it is not an easy task to address those risks, nuclear risks, which we face in the region. So step by step probably is the only approach which can work. We should be realistic.
Thanks, Anton. Edward Howell says, given the motivations behind North Korea's nuclear and missile program, what might be the most likely scenario for a near-term deal, if any, with the United States? I'll answer briefly, and Anton, maybe you have a view on this. We're not soothsayers. We don't assess what might happen. We suggest what should happen, and we suggested this step-by-step approach, keeping denuclearization as the goal. Will this approach be pursued? Will it be accepted? Well, I know that the United States has been reviewing its North Korea policy, has revealed in broad strokes, but we have not, from my perspective, seen an interest currently in Pyongyang about re-engaging. And I should say, by the way, it's not just a bilateral issue between North Korea and the United States, although, as we say, these are the two most important parties.
I will add here, Mark, if we think about the intermediate step, there is no chance to reach it if there is no dialogue. So this is the first precondition: the dialogue should be resumed. And as we learned from the past experience, any deal could be more sustainable if it is multinational. Probably I will stop here.
Thanks. Anton, can you help me with the name of the next questioner?
I think it's Andrei Gubin again. Yeah.
Thank you. So he says, he said there wasn't any test of a transcontinental range. 4,000 kilometers was the maximum. What do you think are the reasons? Is North Korea refraining from revealing real capacity, or is it a lack of reliability? We don't know the reasons for this. Several reasons might be posited. One is that North Korea was careful about not overflying other states' territory. Another might be that North Korea lacked the diagnostic equipment to be able to monitor an intercontinental ballistic range missile that flew on a standard trajectory. And a third reason might be, as you suggest, sir, that a desire not to reveal real capability. But I don't think North Korea knows what the real capability is if it doesn't test. That's a key point in our study. The next question is from Pavel Podvig. He asked both Anton and me, what is our view of the possibility of a freeze as a first step toward denuclearization and reducing tensions? That would be a freeze on missile material production and or missile production testing. What would it take to make this freeze verifiable? And would a Pyongyang-only freeze be politically acceptable in the United States? Anton, do you want to address this first?
Yeah, I mean, Pavel, I like Unity, your report a lot, which was publicized, I think, published a few months ago. And I think this is a good concept. This is an interesting concept. But what is important here, what kind of reciprocal steps could be done by the United States if DPRK would agree to freeze? I would, in theory, would not exclude that. And negotiations, including in Hanoi, demonstrated that Pyongyang is ready to make some steps. But what is really important to identify right reciprocal steps. And for that purpose, I believe that complete calculation in Washington with regard to the Korean Peninsula should be changed. It is not from the report, but my personal view that there is not much new in the recent US review of DPRK policy. At least what I've got from the public sources, it looks very similar what was during the Obama administration. I hope it will not be strategic patience 2.0.
And I'd like to address the last point that Pavel asked. Would a Pyongyang-only freeze be politically acceptable in the United States? Pavel, I think it depends on what would be the reciprocal step by the United States. If it wasn't very much in terms of, if it didn't involve lifting all sanctions, if it was partial sanctions, I think that's probably doable. But I think there's probably a need to look more carefully, understand the benefits of a Pyongyang-only freeze. We didn't mention it, highlight it in our presentation, but one of the most interesting findings of our report was that closing down Pyongyang might stop up to 80% of North Korea's fissile material production. That's a pretty important finding, if true. Now, it depends on assumptions. It depends on an assumption that there's only one other enrichment facility and it's not so very large. But closing down Yongbyon would stop further thermonuclear development if North Korea can't produce plutonium and if they can't produce tritium. So there is value in shutting down Yongbyon. We've only got a couple minutes left. I want to go lightning speed through a couple more questions here. Nicholas McLean, hi Nicholas, asked a couple of questions. What companies are thought to be most likely sources of miniaturization technology? I assume he means for weapons. And is there any indication that North Korea might seek to sell missiles or nuclear weapons to other states? So he's interested in the transnational issues here. There aren't too many countries that have been able to miniaturize weapons, and certainly weapons that could fly intercontinental ranges. And I don't think that there's any possibility that the 5 countries that have ICBMs, the 3 countries, China, United States, and Russia would be interested in selling anything to North Korea. I think we've indicated in our report the reasons why Russia certainly wouldn't do that, and obviously the United States wouldn't either, and China is not known to have engaged in that kind of a transfer of technology. North Korea has been known to have engaged in a lot of missile cooperation with particularly Iran and Pakistan and some other countries. They haven't, as we know, sold any nuclear weapons, but there have been some reports of some nuclear weapons, some nuclear cooperation Anton, anything to add?
Yeah, Mark, if I may to add here. First, we do have in the report the numbers that, according to some sources, annual North Korean income from missile sales in the past were from 200 to 400 million US dollars per year. This is first. Second, we should keep this in mind that in the past, the major motivation for DPRK to sell missiles were money, because they were seeking for money to continue improving their national missile capability. So when we, or not we, but in some offices, people think to apply too much pressure on North Korea, if they are in the very difficult economic situation, it could motivate them to accelerate sales of their missiles, or even other sensitive materials, I will put it that way.
We've reached the hour mark. Since we may have started 30 seconds later, I'm going to pose one more question of the many, many good questions that are here. But the one important question is posed by Artyom Lukin, who has a question to Anton. How did you arrive, how did our report arrive at the assessment that Yongbyon represents roughly 80% of North Korea's fissile production capacity?
Yeah, thank you, Artyom, for your question. This is actually in the report. So we just calculated how much of weapon grade materials we can estimate is produced in Yongbyon. This is what was discussed during the Hanoi summit, because during the Hanoi summit, actually, my understanding, North Koreans agreed that they were open to the idea to dismantle completely all the facilities in Yongbyon. So this is from where our conclusion came. How much is produced in Yongbyon, and North Koreans were not ready to discuss anything beyond that facility.
Well, thank you, Anton. Thank you, IISS support team, for all your work in producing both this launch and the great support we received in making this report. The backroom effort was astounding. You can't believe how many times we went back to our publications team to make more corrections, more changes. And Anton, you can't believe how many times Anton and I had exchanges back and forth. We're very proud of this report, and I hope you do all read it. It's online now. And with this, I will say thank you again. Apologies to those who asked good questions we didn't have time for. Goodbye for now.
Thank you, Mark. Bye-bye.